Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Wordy Pair Podcast. I'm Rudy.
And I am Justin.
And we are going to be talking about I think we've mentioned this in previous episodes, but we're talking about Pippi Longstocking.
We're going
today.
to be talking about the joy of Pippi Longstocking.
The joy of Pippi Longstocking specifically, yes.
I don't know what that means, but that's how I presented it to you when we brought this topic up.
Yeah, and it is a very joyful series of, books and movies, I suppose. I mean, maybe you should start out this one, since you've been a Pippi follower for much longer than I have. Kind of give a perspective.
Well, there's not really much perspective to give. It's a children's tale that was written by a woman named Astrid Lindgren, and she wrote it. She came up with the story. Her daughter was sick and wanted her to tell her a story. I think her daughter came up with the name Pippi Longstocking.
Okay.
And so she told her a story. And then subsequently, when Astrid herself became sick, while she was in bed, she decided, well, I'm going to actually write these stories. And thus was born the story of the world's strongest little girl.
Yeah, but it's not just a story about that. Yeah, it's a lot more than that, actually. But this has been my first time actually reading any of it. I've seen... There was a children's cartoon when we were kids, wasn't there?
Not when we were kids. We would have been... Well, we might have still been in our, mid-teens, but it was a Canadian cartoon, I believe. And it was pretty well animated, considering that I had never heard of it for the longest time.
Sure.
Going back and researching some Pippi stuff several years ago, I came across it, and I was like, I never knew this existed. It wasn't particularly great or anything, but it was cool that it was there. Same with the movies. I mean, the movies are the reason that I knew about Pippi Longstocking, because they used to play them on TV a lot when we were kids.
Sure.
Back when I was a kid, I've got you beat by a few years, and you would be surprised how much different TV. How many different things TV covered in that brief period of time. I don't know. I know there was a 1988 Pippi Longstocking movie that was more, I believe it was more Americanized, and it was a bit more for children than even the original movies from the 60s.
Uh-huh. The one that we watched was, what, a German movie?
Swedish.
Well, no, it was filmed in Germany, I believe.
Yeah, it was filmed. It was like a German. Was it a German-Finnish production? I think.
Maybe. I guess I don't remember the credits exactly, but
I think it was. I think the acting was done in Swedish. I don't think it was in German.
Really?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
I mean, it's a Swedish. Astrid Lindgren is Swedish. It's a Swedish story.
No, I know. I get that, but you don't have to be a Swedish story to. Or you don't have to be a German story to have made into a movie by Germans.
No, not at all. They were written in the 40s, so there was plenty of time for it to become a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the quintessential children's story, the quintessential positive children's story. It's not Grimm's fairy tales. It's very positive and optimistic and happy endings, which is nice.
And very brattish too.
Well, that's kind of one of the other aspects of Pippi Longstocking that I think is interesting, is that she's kind of like a...
She is a free spirit.
Well, she's a free spirit, but she's also like you'd almost call her like an agent of chaos, you know?
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
she, she's, so she kind of always has the ability to solve whatever problems come her way. And she is, a very nice person, but at the same time, she's very, very contrarian, or not necessarily contrarian, but she's a yarn spinner, I guess I could say. And
Yeah,
that's one of the aspects that shows up frequently in the stories, is just her telling some crazy story. And, it's never really, I mean, it's kind of in a fictional world, right? And so it's not really clear whether these stories are actually fiction in the world that she's in or not. So,
for the most part, it's clear that some of the stories that she tells are not true. But what's funny about the way the story is written is that there's so much about Pippi herself that is true, that is surprising to the people around her.
Yeah.
That as a reader, you're not always sure when she's lying and when she's telling the truth. Even though admittedly in the stories at points she talks about how she makes up lies.
Yeah, and it's mentioned several times. There's the aspect of her father where, starting out reading the stories, you assume that her story about her father is a lie, and you find out that it is mostly, if not entirely true, based on her telling of the story. And it's not really like a spoiler. It happens in the end of the first book. It's very interesting how these stories were told about a person who tells extravagant stories. There's something a little meta in there that I kind of enjoyed.
Yeah, and the offhand way that she'll tell her stories, as if she's had them prepared in her head this whole time, or she's just really good at coming up with them on the spot. She'll be talking with children, and then she'll make up some story about how kids do the same thing in Egypt or something. And it'll be just completely off the wall, and of course nobody will believe it, but it's just, she's got it ready to say as soon as she needs to respond to someone.
Well, the thing that I thought was funny was when her father finally showed up, he said, have you been practicing your storytelling? And she's like, yes. So it's very interesting. And it's also, they're really great little children's stories. Like they, but at the same time, they're also stories about a child who isn't really a child, but is a child, but isn't, kind of thing. Like she lives on her own, and she does a lot of things. She doesn't go to school. She doesn't. So there's a lot of like counter.
Well, let's talk about
normality. Yeah,
let's talk about Pippi herself. So
sure,
Pippi Longstocking is somewhat still remembered these days, but nowhere near what it was. Like 30 years ago, if you said Pippi Longstocking, there wasn't a person who wouldn't know who you were talking about. Nowadays, you could bring it up in a conversation with someone half my age and they'd be like, well, who's that? But regardless of that, unless I am mistaken, Pippi Longstocking is still one of, if not the most read children's story around the world.
It has a very universal appeal.
Well, there's actually an Astrid Lindgren Award for children's literature in Germany, and it's the biggest award they have as far as I'm aware.
Huh. I did not know that.
It's called the Alma Award. I don't remember what the MA stands for, but it was like the Astrid Lindgren something award.
I see.
So Pippi Longstocking she's known as the red-haired, pigtailed, freckled girl with a curious little twist on her pigtails is that they stick out sideways from her head. She always does them up so tight that they're sideways.
Mm-hmm.
And most of what happens in these books is perfectly normal stuff. There's just this one element about the stories that makes them really, really ridiculous. And it all kind of stems from the fact that Pippi Longstocking herself was raised on the ocean, sailing the seas, by her father, who was Ephraim Longstocking, the terror of the seven seas. Now, she knows that he's the terror of the seven seas. The rest of the world doesn't even believe that her dad is a pirate, and they have no idea what she's talking about when she brings this up.
Right.
But the story mostly opens up with her showing up in this little town in this empty house. There's these two little kids that live next door to this empty house, and one day they discover Pippi Longstocking playing there. And according to Pippi, this is her house that her father purchased that he was going to use when he retired from being a pirate. and there was a shipwreck in which her father went overboard. And this is one of the things that just makes the story fantastic, is her father is blown overboard, and her assumption from the time that he's blown overboard is that he floated to a nearby island and became a king of the cannibals.
Right.
And she has
So in the books, she specifically says, "Oh, the kids are like, well, aren't you worried that he drowned?" And she's like, "No, he's too fat. He'll just float."
Yeah. And she specifically says that he became a king of the cannibals, and so
right.
He'll come and find her one day after he builds another boat. Which it's like she has no way of actually knowing that for sure throughout the whole story. So when he actually does show up and tells her that yes, indeed, he did become king of the cannibals, it's just like, what? How did she know?
She's just very good at making assumptions.
Yeah, and this whole her and her backstory, the premise of everything that goes on with her, that's what makes the story kind of fun, because everything else in this world is perfectly normal. But then you have this little girl with this crazy backstory, and on top of everything else, she lives in this house by herself, has a suitcase full of gold, which she uses to pay for things that people are just like amazed that she's carrying all this gold around. Several of the stories are about someone trying to rob her and finding out that, oh, she's also the strongest girl in the world, and not by a small margin.
Right.
She can lift a horse over her head. In fact, she does this almost every day because she has a horse that lives on her veranda. And to get off her porch, she will pick the horse up and carry it down off of the veranda. And just, this perfectly normal thing that everyone else just sees and is like, that girl's carrying a horse. Girls don't carry horses. Nobody can carry a horse, but Pippi Longstocking can carry a horse.
Right. There's a lot of like contradictions of that's kind of what makes the stories like pop out, is that there's so much in Pippi, in that single person, there's so much contradiction to common sense, and yet it like even though she does tell lies on occasion, there's a lot of stuff that she says that actually is true, and things that she does that are outside what you would expect a person to be able to do. So, oh, by the way, the movie that that poor horse that they painted polka dots on.
well, you watched the 1969 one that showed her father showing up at the end, and
yeah.
Oh, geez. They did the arm wrestling, right? Her and her dad?
Yes.
Because they were trying to determine who was the stronger of the two. And at the movie, at the very end, her dad does this, lifts a bunch of people up on the back of a door that he rips out of its frame. And then Pippi puts her horse on the same door and puts a bunch of people on it and lifts that up. And they're like, oh, Pippi must be the stronger one now. And it's all jovial and joyful. Like,
yeah.
Her relationship with her dad is simultaneously crazy and fun, but it's also interesting that she is even on her old pirate ship where she lived with her dad for so long, she was also pretty strange in their company, because even then she was stronger than everyone on the ship except for her dad. And so there's like this one other person in the world that she can actually relate to on that level. But he mentions in the books and in the movies, she decides to stay behind for a bit, and he goes, well, you always did do whatever you wanted, and she goes, yeah, that's what you told me to do. So it's an interesting dynamic, and of course, because she was raised on the Seven Seas, there's a lot that is different about Pippi from everything else. She doesn't care about school. She doesn't have a need for it because she can do everything that she wants to do. She regularly cooks throughout the stories. She takes care of her own home, if you want to call it taking care. She has a lot of fun in her own home. And when she's cleaning the place, she's always having fun doing it. Like, tying scrub brushes to her feet and skating around to clean the floors.
So everything is fun with Pippi Longstocking, I think, is one of the nice aspects of the stories, is that she takes mundane things and turns them into great adventures. Like there was that story where they went across like part of the lake to the little island on the lake, and they The whole time she was, bringing up crazy things that weren't really happening, but made the whole thing more exciting, kind of thing. There's a lot of fun there too. It's about fun in like a way that is not. I don't know. I wonder if it's like some kind of like a countercultural thing or something where like. I don't know.
I don't think it's that. I think it's exactly as you described it. It's like taking a. So in the story that you brought up, one of the kids mentions Robinson Crusoe and being shipwrecked, and so they decide that it would be fun to be shipwrecked. And of course, Pippi says, "Well, we have to have an island to have a shipwreck." And there's these two little kids that are always playing with Pippi. Her neighbors Tommy and Annika.
Yes.
And Tommy says, "Well, I know where there's a little island somewhere," and of course, Pippi can never just get an answer from someone without saying something back. So she says, "Well, is it surrounded by water?" And he goes, "Of course." I believe she said something like, "Well, that's good because it wouldn't do if it was surrounded by land. It would have to be a proper island." Something like that. She's always making little remarks like that.
That's also another good aspect of to maybe touch on is that she always gets the last word.
Yeah. It's one of the things that a lot of people would probably describe the books as. She's very smart alecky with the adults in the story, even more so than with the kids. Like even her good friends in the story, she'll be a smart aleck with, but they love it. The adults in the books tend to look down on it, but nobody really can.
No one can oppose her.
she can't get nobody can get a handle on Pippi Longstocking. It's like there's not really anything you can do about it. They try to put her in a children's home, and she's just like, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that," and so they just can't. And I don't know if it's the way it was translated in the English version, because they were originally written in Swedish, but some of the translations make the story sound really, really funny. There's a story where there's some kids that are beating up another kid, and Pippi puts a stop to that, and the description for the way she does so isn't like you would think that it would have said she threw them up into a tree, but instead they write she put them in the tree, kind of like you just pick them up by the collar and place them there. And they did this several times. When some burglars broke into her home, she didn't throw them up on top of her wardrobe; she set them there.
I see.
So I don't know if that was something due to the translation or what, but I thought that was a funny way of wording it, made it entertaining.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of almost everything that is written in those stories is pure joy and just fun to read. There's all the characters that they introduce.
Even now they were fun to read. I'm not sure that I got a huge amount of literary interestingness out of them, but they're fun. They're still fun today, even for a grown adult.
Yeah, and there's not much to say in terms of literary content. There are things that are interesting about it that aren't necessarily. I mean, this is one thing that isn't really done purposefully by Astrid Lindgren in the story. Obviously not, since they were written in the 40s, well before things like Doctor Who, and well after things like Sherlock Holmes. But the method that she uses in the story is the Sherlock Holmes method of she has these two little kids, Annika and Tommy, that are there to observe how wild Pippi is, just like how Watson is there to observe how genius Sherlock Holmes is.
Oh, that's a really good point, actually.
And that's the story doesn't really work as well without that, because if it was just there are stories that are in each book where it's just Pippi wandering through town, but she's always with like one or two exceptions, she's always communicating with another person, and in most of the stories she's being followed around by Tommy and Annika.
Yeah.
And you get to see how much fun they have simply by being in her presence and doing what she wants to do with them.
And whenever she does something wrong, so to speak, she always fixes the problem, right? There's that little part where she goes into a clothing store, and she basically rips the arm off of a mannequin.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, I'll pay for it." There's no she's unchildish in a lot of ways, and one of those ways is also that she takes responsibility for what she does.
Yeah, which is I can't think of any examples where she does not do that. And that's
right.
That's one of the things where it's like, this isn't just some bratty child that these stories are written about. And so there's no... Astrid Lindgren is not throwing any moral dilemma at you like, well, how should Pippi have behaved in this situation? There's none of that.
Right.
This is purely a story of fun and a child who just does what she wants and lives her life the way she wants to. And you can kind of foresee, just by reading the stories, that this is how she will always live her life.
Yeah.
And, of course, there's advantages to being, as she calls it, rich as a mountain troll, and being able to lift a horse over your head. So, obviously, when they send the police to, haul in Pippi and bring her to a child's home, that doesn't work out for them. She physically picks them up and places them outside her gate, much to their surprise. And they pretty much just pack up and say, okay, well, we can't do anything about her, so we'll just leave her to her own devices.
We're at an impasse.
Yeah. It's actually kind of funny. The 1988 movie, they did a few things that weren't really in the books, up to and including the kids deciding to... So I don't know if this was in one of the books I didn't read, but I don't remember there ever being a story about the kids deciding to run away, which they do in this book. And it's, they're all kind of laughing at it the whole time. They take off on an airplane that is... Well, okay, so early in the movie, Pippi observes a gyrocopter.
Okay.
And she wants one of her own, but obviously she doesn't know how to build one. So she gets help from the person who did build it. But they weren't able to finish it in time. So when the kids decide they're going to run away because they were really trying to get Pippi in this children's home. And so the other two kids are like, well, we don't want you to go into a home either, so let's all just run away. And of course, Pippi's, like you said, she's responsible for a lot of things. So what ends up happening is she indulges the other two kids in the project of running away. But you can tell, a couple minutes into this, that her plan is not to actually run away with these kids. She's kind of just bringing them on this joyride with the full intention of taking them back at some point.
Yeah, and making sure that they get back safe and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and even the kid's mother at one point says, I wouldn't be able to believe that Pippi would let anything happen to those kids. So there is definitely an element of responsibility to Pippi Longstocking. And then, of course, they also have the over-the-top fun of the story, in which they don't have a propeller to lift the gyrocopter, so Pippi picks up a pair of paddles and just spins around really fast, because she could, probably take Goku in a fight, honestly. And, it's interesting to note that I know that Pippi Longstocking had some popularity in Japan for a while. Hayao Miyazaki was even early on, I think even before Nausicaa, was planning on doing a Pippi Longstocking movie, and I don't know if he couldn't get the rights or what, but it never happened. But she was a character that was known in Japan, and when I look at characters like Akira Toriyama's Arale from Dr. Slump, I sometimes wonder if she had an influence on characters like that. Because that is a
really
very Pippi Longstocking character.
Yeah. Huh, that's a really good point. I would not have thought of that. But yeah, you could very well be right. She's kind of an archetype at this point.
Yeah, and there really hadn't been too many kid stories like that with a character like that. I can think of maybe one or two close ones. There was an old book called Silly Billy that kind of had some similar qualities, but that was more about a kid that just wanders off one day and has all these weird adventures. The one that I always remember the most is that he came across this building where people were running in and out with mirrors, and he said, well, what's going on? And they said, oh, well, we're trying to get some sunlight into the building, so we're running in and out with mirrors to reflect the light into the building. And he goes, and he's supposed to be the character that's silly in the story, and everyone around him is acting silly, and he just says, well, why don't you just put windows in? And then he walks away, and he's changed these people's lives. But Pippi Longstocking kind of sticks out more than any of these characters in a lot of old children literature.
Well, so there's quite a large number of stories. To prep for this episode, I read a book that contains the contents of 3 smaller books that have been published under various in various places. But I think like there's like a bigger collection that had like 10 books or something like that. Something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, there were a lot of books, and each book had like 7 or 8 short stories.
Yeah.
I think the first book had like 10 or something. They were all written in that short story format, but each book was kind of continuing the story of Pippi with reference to some of the things that had happened before. And I love the way that Astrid will write these things, and you like it's a children's book, so you're supposed to be able to just pick it up and read it. So you don't have to know anything from the other books. There's always enough given to you that you don't need to have followed the deep and dramatic lore of Pippi Longstocking.
You don't need to worry too much about the canon.
So there's also so the movie that you watched was the first one.
Yeah.
There is a sequel to that movie. They did do Pippi in the South Seas with the same actress.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then in 1988 that was a new actress for that movie. And
because it would have been she would be what? In her mid-30s at that point?
Probably late 20s, because she was a younger actress. And the kid, it's kind of neat. The kids in that story, I don't know if you noticed that they actually had a lot of good choreography for the kids, and some sloppy choreography, like when all the pirates were tossing Pippi around at the end of the movie. It looked like she was nearly going to fall out of their arms. But like, you remember Pippi dancing in the shop, and the other little girl at the very end joins in and starts dancing. It's like, oh, they actually practiced that. For the most part, the movie kind of looks like they just sort of did things. And
it's not super high polished, but I mean, neither the stories aren't super high polished either, so it's appropriate.
Yeah, and it's I mean, they weren't the greatest movies, but when you're 7 or 8 years old, they've got a lot of entertainment value. You're just watching other kids do a lot of fun things and thinking, boy, I'd like to be doing that.
Well, there's a lot of imagination in them. That's one of their draws, is that even just Pippi's stories. Someone had, what's her name? Astrid Lindgren? Lundgren?
Yeah.
She had to think up all the crazy, goofy lies that Pippi came up with. And in general, like when she's talking about like people from like a faraway country, it's not always like a complete lie, but it's like 90% lie and 10% truth kind of thing sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. Not all the time, though.
No, not all the time, but there's enough little tidbits of truth in there that it makes you wonder whether that would make an observer in world be confused.
Yeah. Yeah, there's times where she'll tell a lie where once you know that she's been telling the truth about other things, you'll be left guessing whether she's telling the truth about that. Because it becomes obvious very quick that, oh, she actually has spent most of her life sailing the seas, so she probably did visit a lot of these places. But then she'll tell a bunch of kids at a school a lie like, oh, in China they spend the whole day eating caramels, and if they catch you studying, you get in trouble. Yeah. And then the kids will be like, well, what do the teachers do then? And she goes, well, they unwrap the caramels for the kids, silly. Right.
There's always a little extra layer in a Pippi Longstocking story.
Yeah. And a lot of the lies have like 3 or 4 different layers that she'll go through, as if the way she talks about the things that she lies about, even when she is outright lying, she's ready for any question that someone will have about her lie. So it sounds so natural that you could almost believe, if you were one of those kids, you might believe that she was telling the truth.
Yeah. No, I mean, I still remember one of the first short stories that I read was the one of her trying to get her to go to school. And like the first thing that happens is that the teacher asks her, what's the capital of Portugal? And she goes off on this rant.
Yeah,
she's blah, 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 you should send them a letter and ask them if they know what their capital is if you don't know what their capital is. And, she goes on and on and on and on and on for probably a page almost of this, until finally she's like, oh, and by the way, I've been to Lisbon. It's like
It is a fantastic moment in which, after a very short time, a teacher actually tells a student, you know what, maybe you should come back to school when you're a little more mature. And this is like grade school, so it's just it's so satisfying to watch Pippi interact with the adults in these stories.
Yeah.
One of the stories, she's actually she's confronting burglars that broke into her house, and at first they believe that they're dealing with a little girl whose dad is asleep upstairs, only to find out that what they thought was her dad or a family member is really just a monkey that she has living in the house with her. So these guys are going to rob her, and she's having none of it. They ask her where her gold coins is, and she outright tells them, and they go to take them, and then she says, but I'm going to go ahead and take them back. And just like with no anger, no real rage in the way that Pippi handles this. In fact, I think there's only one story in which you actually see Pippi get really angry at someone.
Yeah.
But she takes the gold coins back from these burglars, and then she tosses them up on her wardrobe, and I can't exactly remember how that one went, but she ends up convincing them
they
to
escape. So they escape, and then she talks to them later, and they do something for her, and she gives them each a gold coin.
Yeah. She has them. Well, no, they're trying to escape, and she stops them and convinces them to play with her for a while.
Something like that.
She makes them dance with her and all these other things, and then as they're on their way out, she gives them each a gold coin and goes, "Here, these ones you've actually earned honestly."
Right.
So you get this sense that she always really knows what she's doing.
And she knows what's going on around her, even though she seems to be oblivious to it.
Yeah, she does. At the beginning of that story, she seems completely oblivious to the idea that these guys are trying to bamboozle her and rob her.
Right.
Oh, they're just such fun stories, though.
Yeah, they are. I mean...
And even going back and watching the movies, it's like they weren't that great of movies, but they had a lot of fun to them that's just like, I mean, I could sit back and watch this again at some point, probably.
Well,
they're a bit too young, a bit more for a younger audience, but...
yeah, they're for a young audience, that's fine. But they do... So here's the thing, right? Like, there's a lot of media that takes an old story and tries to make new stories up for it, but they do a really crappy job of it. There was that Nero Wolfe radio show, right? And instead of, like, adapting the actual Nero Wolfe stories, what they did is they made up a bunch of original stories. And the story quality is not very good, and they have to cram it all into half an hour, and there's not really any mystery, and, it's just not you could make a good Nero Wolfe radio show, but these were not particularly amazing. In the same way, they didn't try to make up random Pippi stories. They adapted a lot of the original stories, and since the original stories were good, the movie also feels pretty good.
Yeah, and it's also not just a movie that feels good, but it's a feel-good movie.
Yeah.
And it's definitely one of the more whimsical movies that I'd be able to think of off the top of my head. I mean, it doesn't get too much more whimsical than...
It's a weird type of whimsy. It's a because the whole rest of the world around her is normal. She's the only thing that's really that whimsical. She
is an aberration.
Yes, and that is that's what gets played with a lot in a lot of the stories, especially the early stories. Each of the early stories is basically, here is a quote unquote magic power that Pippi Longstocking has, that people don't believe that she has it, and then she proves it to them.
It's actually pretty funny that you use the word magical, because I was flipping through some Pippi stuff on YouTube. I found a couple of interviews with the actress from the '88 movie, and the interview was introduced as, Pippi Longstocking, a girl with magical powers, and I'm sitting there listening to this like, well, she doesn't really have magical powers unless you're counting her super strength as a magical power, which usually isn't considered a magical power.
No, not usually.
Because that's really it. She's really, really strong. That is the one thing that is completely different about her than every other human being. The rest of it is just her free spirit.
Her strength is a plot device, basically, because whenever she gets into a situation that you would think that a child would have trouble handling, she handles it easily because she is ridiculously strong, and that both enables her to, like, stop people from doing things or help people do things, but it also surprises people to the point where they're like, we're not going to mess with her.
Yeah, and it comes in handy for a few of this. Like, there's a story where she rescues a couple children from a burning building and finally earns the respect of the town that had, up until then, kind of viewed her as a misbehaved child.
Oh, yeah. She climbs in through the window, basically. Like, she goes across a tree or something like that.
Well, she she has her monkey take a rope up a tree. While everyone else
Yes.
is trying to figure out how to get these kids down, her monkey takes a rope up a tree. She climbs it. She has the monkey, well, she basically throws the monkey into the window, and he ties the rope for her to walk across.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of a magical power, that she can tell this monkey to do things. So I guess there's a bit of truth to that. But she then tightrope walks, rescues these children, sends them back down to their parents, and then she dances a little jig on the tightrope at the very end of it while this building is burning next to her, and everyone's cheering for her. Yeah, there's a lot of fun things. It's basically just scenario after scenario of things that Pippi does that's fun. Yeah, and at one point they're at a circus and the world's strongest man comes out, and she's been interrupting the circus nonstop since the time they sat down. You know, she doesn't get the idea of the circus and that you're supposed to sit and watch the show. So she's being very interactive. Like, I think she interrupts the trapeze artist and does her own little trapeze stunts, and they try to throw her out and she just doesn't leave. And then the world's strongest man comes out, and the ringmaster makes the mistake of challenging anyone to a wrestling match with the world's strongest man. And Pippi starts climbing in, and Tommy and Annika are like, "You can't do that. You're going to get yourself hurt." And she goes, "No, I'm not. That's just the world's strongest man. I'm the world's strongest girl."
Right.
And so she goes in and proceeds to completely upstage the world's strongest man. It is...
there are a lot of people who get mad at Pippi, and then she like turns it around, basically.
Yeah. There's several characters who start off like not happy with her at all, and then something happens where they actually realize, oh, she's all right. I'm good with her.
She's okay. Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where she's mischievous, but she also does good deeds. She's generous. She has a lot of really positive character traits as well that kind of complement her ability to deal with everybody else. You know, like there's that early story where she goes to the candy store and she gets like 80 pounds of candy and she just starts handing it out to people. All the kids are like, "Oh, we want some candy. We want some candy." Then she takes them all to the toy store, and she just, you know, it's one of those things where the character doesn't have limits, and that's used in like the best possible way to make her into to help make her a better person and make her interactions with other people more positive.
Yeah, and I for one would not object to a magical girl show about Pippi Longstocking.
Does she like swing a wand and then the pigtails grow out?
Something like that, or she swings the pigtails and does a transformation sequence into even rattier clothes than she usually wears. That's of course another aspect of Pippi Longstocking. She's not described in the stories as the prettiest girl. She's actually, you know, she's described as having a bit of a pug nose, and she's got these braids that stick out sideways from her head.
Yep.
And even in the parts of the story where she's doing things like going to parties and she's talking about dressing up to be more ladylike, she comes out in these ridiculous clothes and like a hat that's too big. And one of her character traits is that she's always wearing shoes that are twice the size of her feet because she likes to wiggle her toes.
Yeah.
She of course wears long stockings, one brown and one black. A lot of times in the alternate media for Pippi, she's got different colors of long stockings, but it's always like one different color from the other.
Yeah,
and
mismatching.
Her dress is... I actually forgot this, but in the first story, I believe, her dress is described as one that she had tried to make herself, but she ran out of material, so she used material of a different color to patch it together, which is why her dress looks really patchy.
Oh, okay.
It's a very iconic look. Like, a lot of times...
Well, yeah, she's extremely unique in like a ton of ways. I mean, she's a standout character for sure.
Yeah, she's almost like a... let's see, what's a good way to put... I don't want to say a bargain bin Wendy from Wendy's restaurants, because she's better than Wendy, but...
No, but she's like
the Pigpen version of Wendy, almost.
Well, like, she just has different priorities and different, you know, because like part of her wildness is part of her character, right? So it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for someone who does the things that she does to maintain her clothes in the best of repair stuff like that.
Well, she simultaneously doesn't keep her clothes in the best upkeep, while also obviously being able to do things like repair her own clothes.
Yeah, well, she's very self-reliant, so that works out well. But she doesn't have the same priorities as like quote unquote normal people have. So things don't get done when she doesn't think that things need to be done when other people think they need to be done.
Yeah, especially when it comes to multiplication or plutification or whatever she called it.
Yeah.
She has a lot of fun with that, where people are trying to teach her all these things about numbers, and she's just like, it's not really sticking in my head. I don't really need this stuff. And so she doesn't go to school, but she has like different motivations than everyone else. So when the other kids tell her that they're going to have a Christmas vacation and they'll be able to play soon, she actually gets a little sad about this and says, well, I don't get Christmas vacations because I don't go to school. So she decides to go to school the next day.
Yeah.
Does not work out well for the teacher.
No.
But that's kind of like how she operates, is just like, oh, well, this is something I want to do, and I can't do this unless I do this other thing that I normally wouldn't do. So she goes ahead and does it.
Yeah.
She doesn't see the need for a lot of things like multiplication and addition, and she'll count her gold coins, but she'll count them out of order.
Yeah.
She can write, but not very well. There's a couple of times where it's implied that she can't write at all, but then when you actually do see her write, you see that she can write. She just can't get the grammar and the structure and the spelling and the punctuation. It's the non-important things.
Yeah, all those little details. Unimportant details.
I absolutely love the letter that she leaves behind when they go to play being shipwrecked.
Oh, yeah.
The other kids' parents get home before they make it back, and the letter just says, don't worry, your kids aren't dead or anything. We're just a little shipwrecked at the moment. We'll be back soon.
Yeah.
Back when you could write things like that in a book without people freaking out, like, oh my God, you're implying that kids could die in this children's book. It's like, no, children's books used to be horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. Have you ever read the original Wizard of Oz books?
No.
This is pure nightmare fuel.
Unadulterated, 200 proof.
Yeah, the Wizard of Oz movie had nothing on the books when it came to... It's like, no matter how creepy and weird things got in that movie, you go read one of the books and it's just like, as an adult, this will give you nightmares.
I will have to check those out. They're all public domain, aren't they?
I think so. The first one's not quite so bad, but as they get further and further into them, there's these horrifying situations that these kids are in. And there's these horrifying creatures. Like, I think there's a guy who's just like covered in cancer.
Okay. I did not expect Wizard of Oz and Man Made of Cancer to make an appearance that close to each other, but there we go.
Oh, that's probably one of the more tame things. I mean, if you've ever seen The Return of Oz, or The Return to Oz, I don't know if you saw that one. I think that was 1980s, it might have been early 80s. But that movie was a lot closer to the way that the books usually operated, and that movie was absolutely 100% without any doubt. Like, okay, have you ever seen Clash of the Titans?
No.
Really? Geez, this is... Okay. What about Jason and the Argonauts?
No.
Huh.
I haven't seen a lot of old movies.
Oh, I mean, that's no big deal. My point is just that I'm pretty sure The Return to Oz is a bigger source of nightmare fuel than either of those, which are largely considered nightmare fuel movies. Like Clash of the Titans had some claymation and little animation things that they did that
I've seen some clips of those animations. Yeah, they're pretty. Yeah, they definitely have something going on there that is a little bit terrifying.
And if we're going to take an aside here real quick to the Wizard of Oz, I guess let's bring
Sure.
up the very first Wizard of Oz book, because the movie, it didn't do it justice. The movie lost a lot of the point of the book. So you had these four characters. You had Dorothy's trying to get home.
Yep.
Not really that important of a character in the story in the first book until it gets closer to the end. She's kind of just there to gather the other... She's gathering her entourage so that the story can conclude at the end of the first book.
Is she the narrator, or is it
No,
written in third person?
It's narrated in third person.
Okay.
But she's there meeting all these wonderful characters, and the interesting thing about that first Wizard of Oz book, which is probably the least nightmare fuel one of them all. There's really not too much in it that's nightmare fuel. I mean, there is the scene where the Tin Man slaughters 40 wolves, but apart from that, not too much that's crazy. But it's interesting that so the way that those books play out is you have the Cowardly Lion. Every time they come across a problem and something that, someone's going to have to make a literal leap of faith at one point, there's a chasm they have to cross, and nobody else sees a way to do it. So the Cowardly Lion takes a running start and leaps the chasm.
Okay.
And this is persistent throughout the story. The way that each of the characters works, the Cowardly Lion is the bravest one in the book. The Tin Man, who has no heart, is upset at the idea of even stepping on an ant. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. Except for the wolves, but the wolves were trying to hurt Dorothy. So that was a bit of a conundrum.
Yeah.
The Scarecrow, who has no brain, each time they have a problem, he comes up with a master plan to solve it with hardly any effort.
Uh-huh.
So the thing that they're searching for, they already have all along, which you can kind of interpret that as being true at the end of the movie, but they don't really show that during the movie. I mean, they don't show the Scarecrow really coming up with much of a plan. They don't show the Tin Man having a heart, and they don't show the Cowardly Lion really being brave.
Yeah, they just kind of say it.
Yeah. So the books they're written way, way different than what that movie was. And the later books, they just got darker and darker. Like, one of the main characters in the later books is this boy that was sold to a witch by his parents in exchange for the witch not hurting them, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Or not doing something to their town. They are quite a read, though. I fully recommend going through all of them, which is something I haven't been through all of them yet. But
how many of them are there? Do you know?
No, I don't. There's a lot, though.
Oh, shoot. I didn't know it was like a long series of books.
Yeah, it's there's the city of Oz, the Emerald City has a very, very, or rather the whole world of Oz has a very deep lore.
Yeah.
It's largely described by the author in a sort of, I think it's a sort of sarcastic, socialistic way, where the characters will constantly talk about how there's no real money. Although every once in a while something is used like money, and I'm not really sure if that's intentional on the part of the author or an oversight. But I remember reading about some of the stories being written as kind of parodying the times and like the bankers of the time and the way that the monetary system was set up. Like the Yellow Brick Road was kind of a metaphor and all these other things. So it's hard to tell. Like, I think it would be difficult. I'd have to read through them again to really see if there's anything to that. Because a lot of people read The Wizard of Oz and think that the author is a fanciful socialist. But I suspect, given some of the metaphors, that might have been satire.
Huh.
And since we've got to come back around to Pippi anyway, we should also mention that. Now, I don't know all the books that Astrid Lindgren wrote, but she also wrote a fairly long kid's story called Mischievous Meg.
Okay.
That is a bit less short story driven than Pippi Longstocking. Like, it's an actual longer novel that it's still kind of got the whole each chapter is a short story thing, but it seems to tell a larger story overall than the Pippi stories did.
Sure.
It's no Pippi Longstocking, but it's got a touch of that Astrid Lindgren imagination to it.
Well, she really let her skills decay under that Pippi Longstocking money.
I wouldn't blame her.
Yeah.
Now, kids' novels aren't my thing, but if I could write one that good, I would. Kids' novels are usually a bigger moneymaker than fiction.
Yeah.
So soak it up. Enjoy that Swedish whatever currency they call it.
I think they're kroners.
Kroners?
I think so.
This is such a weird name for a currency.
Eh.
Yeah, there's actually... Is it that first book where they actually make some references to the Swedish language, even though it's... They don't really... They bring up the fact that it takes place in Sweden here and there in the books, but in the translations, that's not clear until it's actually brought up.
Yeah.
Like, it could pretty much be anywhere, unless you speak Swedish and Villa Villacula actually means something. That's something we missed. So the home that Pippi lives in actually has a name that I don't know if her father gave it that name or if they bought it with that name, whatever it was, doesn't matter. But she lives in a place called Villa Villacula, and it's interesting that she has this place that has its own name when nobody else in that town has anything similar to that. And it's just a house. It's just a house that she has.
Well, it's in the movie, at least, it looks like it's a decent sized house, and I mean, it's not in great repair, but it's, got multiple floors and, a spacious kitchen and all that stuff. It's a nice house.
Well, that probably would have been a pretty normal size house for someone in Sweden at that time. So it probably didn't look it wouldn't have looked like a mansion to, anyone at the time. There's a lot to be said about a lot of those older houses. I mean, if you drive around like here in Michigan, if you go to a lot of places where there's older houses, they're much larger. Like visit down by Wyandotte and the Detroit River, and you see a lot of the houses down 1st and 2nd Street, and they're just much bigger than, the houses that are being built today.
Bigger families, maybe?
Probably. Bigger families, probably shared houses.
Yeah.
I know my aunt had a house that was basically 2 houses stuck together, and for a while, I think two of my aunts lived there. And then when one of them moved out, my cousin moved into the other part of the house.
Okay.
I'm not sure about that, but I would guess that would probably have been a pretty normal size house for the time.
Well, we see a few houses, and they're all we see some houses in the movie, and the houses in the movie are smaller than Pippi's house, and then we see like apartments where people are living in like little flats or apartments or whatever you want to call them. So I mean, it seems like it's it's one of those things where it's a luxurious house, but it's wasted on her kind of thing.
Maybe. I mean, that could be it, or it could just be that the movies were made in 1969 and the books were written in 1945.
Possibly, yeah.
I'm not really sure on that. I'm just making a guess.
Yeah, I don't know.
But nonetheless, you'd want a somewhat interesting house to, there's a lot of drawings in the Pippi Longstocking books that kind of show the house looking similar to the one that was in the movies. I don't know if that came before or after, but judging by the way that the things were drawn in the books, I'm going to say they came before the movies. So maybe they just, maybe that was just a fanciful house that someone drew up and they wanted to find something similar for the movies.
Yeah, fair enough.
Now, it's possible that those movies were not filmed in Sweden. They might have actually been filmed in Germany.
I thought that they were. Like, I remember watching the opening credits and saying, "Oh, this is a German production, not a Swedish production."
It was a German company that filmed it.
Yes, but I guess
I mean, it's Europe. Sweden is like right there, so they could have been filming in Sweden.
Possibly. It's been a little. It's been like what?
Look, we're called the Wordy pair. We don't research the actual film properties. We only research the storytelling properties.
I mean, I'm sitting in front of a computer. I could just look it up right now.
No, Wordy pair.
Words. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just it was a fun movie. Like it was nice seeing all of the or several of the stories that I had read converted into movie form. The hot air balloon story was not one that was in the book that I got, so that was new to me. It was very fun to watch her just dump like 3 ounces of sand out of a bag, and then like the balloon just goes up like a rocket.
Yeah. And then the way that it showed the balloon when they took those long shots where it was clearly just a toy balloon hanging on a string. And it also had that fun little aspect of not being the best dub job either. So
I mean, you can't. It's not like where you can't word fit real people's faces. So
yeah, it made it more fun.
It was. I mean, I was expecting it, so it's not like it was a problem. There was. It's funny because in the movie, when they do the hot air balloon thing, there's like a guy who like works in front of a church or something like that. He's like a custodian or something, and like. This was not a very Pippi Longstocking joke, I guess, or at least it wasn't like any of the jokes in the books that I had read. But like they're like he says he sees the hot air balloon, he goes to try to tell somebody, they're like, "You've been drinking again, haven't you?" And I was like, okay, that's a little different.
Well, I mean, there is That
There
that
probably
kind of
is a hot air balloon story. I just don't know whether that's what happens in it.
well, not just that, but there's also there's a level of maturity to some of the jokes and some of the scenarios in the books
Mm-hmm.
that you don't get out of a lot of kids' stories these days. Like, I know at one point there's a village drunk in one of the stories that is pretty much robbing a hot dog stand or a sausage vendor or something.
Oh, yeah, that one, yeah.
And Pippi gives him Pippi doesn't really beat people up. What she does to this guy is she just picks him up and tosses him up in the air several times and catches him, leaving him utterly confused and more than willing to pay for the hot dogs that he ate, and then he trods off home. But I think the only time in any of the stories that Pippi gets legitimately angry at someone is when she catches someone whipping their horse because they have a cart stuck in the mud. And she not only tosses this guy up into the sky several times, she also picks up the whip as if she's going to whip him, but then she says, "Oh, it's a pity, though. The whip is actually broken." And then she sits there ripping the whip apart piece by piece in front of him.
Yeah. But then she helps to carry his stuff out of his wagon to where he needs to go.
Yeah. There's always this element of, like, she usually forgives the villains in the story.
Yeah.
In the hopes that maybe they'll change their ways.
Well, she kind of does change their ways, even if by like an application of a little bit of force. So, like, the implication generally is that they've seen that there's a force that is more powerful than them, and that they better be careful about what they do.
Yeah.
The implication is that she's like a positive influence on the village in the sense that, she teaches people lessons, but like it's never preachy or anything like that. It's just the whole thing is shown kind of from the perspective, like a childlike perspective, where, well, he's just being mean, so we'll just teach him a little bit of a lesson, and then he'll say he's sorry and go home.
Yeah, and some of that even translates to things that Astrid never wrote herself. Like at the end of the 1988 movie, it kind of ends in the same way as the one that you watched, where her dad shows up.
Yeah.
And in this one, they've been running with the whole thing where her dad became king of the cannibals. And at the end of the movie, when Tommy and Annika are asking him about it, he goes, "Oh yes, I am king of the cannibals, but it's okay, I've converted them to vegetarian cannibals." It's just this little side joke where it's like, you kind of get the feeling that Pippi's dad, being the terror of the seven seas, is still a lot like Pippi, where he's not really a terror of the seven seas. He's actually this happy and fun guy.
Yeah.
Of course, then the books, I believe the second book, there's a story that Pippi tells about how her and her dad once tossed a bunch of scallywags out of a bar in Singapore. So they were out there causing mischief and stopping bad guys and things like that, even when they were pirates.
Yeah. I mean, there's it's the third book, I think, where they actually go to the cannibal island, and it takes up almost the whole book.
Yeah, Pippi in the South Seas.
Right. But it's not just her. She takes Tommy and Annika with her.
Yeah.
And it changes them too. It's a fun story. Everyone is afraid of Pippi's dad. Like the robbers are afraid of Pippi's dad because they've already had an encounter with him. And they're like, well, we'll just wait for him to like go away on a boat, and then we'll go and we'll take all these pearls or whatever. And then they find out that Pippi's there, and they're like, well, she's just a kid. Well, we can take care of this kid. And then it doesn't go well for them.
She's worse. She's worse.
She's worse.
Yeah, that's actually really been bothering me these past couple of weeks. I'm really wondering if Akira Toriyama's Arale was based off of Pippi Longstocking. It's almost exactly the same character.
I mean, it's very likely. Yeah. I mean, he writes children's stories, or at least he started out writing children's stories. Well, Dragon Ball is a children's story. It was written for a comic book that, for a manga publication that young boys purchase and read. I would be totally unsurprised if he had read a large quantity of children's stories and had found Pippi Longstocking among those stories that he read.
Yeah, totally. And it would have been at the time where she was really popular anyway, so it wouldn't be surprising at all. A lot of literature that you would normally associate as, Western literature, a lot of that was present in Japan in the 80s.
Yeah.
You can see its influence on a lot of anime.
Well, I mean, there's always been a strong, like, assimilation aspect. Like, some of the really good, like there have been anime versions of a bunch of Grimm's fairy tales. There was a series where they did one of them was the Bush Baby, which we might want to talk about someday. But
yeah,
that one was part of a series where they took a bunch of like famous Western novels and basically turned them into kids animated shows.
I think they had they had Heidi. They had
Heidi
they
was
had
one
Anne
of
of
them.
Green Gables.
Yes, they did. And it was a very large series. Like I think I looked into it and like they produced 50 or 60 episodes of this stuff, something like that, maybe more.
Yeah, I mean, Grimm's fairy tales alone was probably close to 40 or 50 episodes.
Yeah,
and that one was one that that came over here relatively early. Like I remember watching that as a kid in the 80s on like Channel 4 or whatever, back when we only had 3 television stations.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would be very surprised if Toriyama didn't know about Pippi Longstocking when he started writing. What was it, Dr. Slump?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what else can we say about Pippi? I mean, there's not really too much to the stories other than that they are a joy. They are, fun reads. They are definitely good for children.
Things about them that's just good. They are kind of just purely joyful, lighthearted stories of a little girl who is chaotic good and all the fun that comes along with being chaotic good.
Like high strength rolls.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with alignment, but sure.
It does in Pippi's case. I
just wonder what her dump stat was.
Oh, let's see.
No, I mean, they're great stories, and like I even enjoyed them. Reading for the first time as an adult, they were enjoyable to read, and the movie was good. And I've read 3 books, and I would probably read 3 more if I picked them up.
Because you'd never experienced any Pippi Longstocking until I brought it up, right?
Not really. I mean, like the only things I knew about was like I had heard. I could have sworn there was a children's TV series, like an animated show that I saw.
It was we mentioned it when we started talking about this. It was an animated.
No, I know, but it's just strange because I remember it being much bigger than you described it as.
Well,
if that makes sense.
It was probably 24 episodes, and there was a movie as well. And it was pretty well animated. Like it was on the level of like a Disney animation almost. Okay. Maybe with a lower frame rate.
Sure. Yeah, that's pretty much all I and like it's not like I watched a ton of it. I just saw that it was on TV. Like I think I maybe caught half an episode when a little sibling wanted to watch it or something. But like, yeah, this was pretty much my first significant dose of Pippi Longstocking, and it was pretty darn good.
Yeah, and I'm guessing just from the read through of it, you can understand why I like this character so much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, okay, so first off, unlikely characters with unlikely traits is something that shows up a lot in your writing, and you can see some of that there. You can see the contrarian nature of like the universe showing up kind of there. There's a lot going on. It's I can see how it influenced. Or well, I think I see how it influenced you to a certain degree.
I mean, I tried very hard to be a Pippi Longstocking when I was a kid. I mean, I was just like, I was very contrarian even when I was young. I was just like, I don't, this whole school thing is silly. And
that's not how this is going to go.
Yeah. But, of course, in my case, I was stuck with it.
Kinda. I don't know. We got up to some hijinks.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, don't even get me started about the things that... Like, you weren't there for the stuff that me and Derek and Brian got up to in high school.
Oh, I know.
But,
I arrived late to the scene, but it was still clear that there was a history of shenanigans.
Most people get told they have to stay in school when they misbehave. We had a superintendent that was happy to see us leave at one point.
That's probably the best thing that you can do in a public school.
Absolutely,
make them happy to see you leave.
I mean, it was Even in elementary school, a lot of times it was just like there was a point, I think around third grade, where I took a look around and I was just like, this is not conducive to my education in any way.
Well, I mean, I saw the same thing about the same time, but I went in a different direction, and I just started like going to the library and getting books that might actually teach me something.
I mean, that's what I did too. The difference was you still passed your classes, and I was just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that.
Like I actually have all of my old grades from elementary school. You can see the exact moment when I said, this is kind of dumb.
This is stupid, and I shouldn't have to do this.
It's just like perfect scores, third grade. What happened?
Yeah. I guess, I think final verdict. Highly recommend Pippi Longstocking to adults and children alike.
And if you need something for your kids to read that isn't going to be mindless drivel and will actually get them to use their imagination, which is an important part of children's reading, Pippi Longstocking is the way to go.
It's not. They're very easy reads. They're very short because they're separated into these individual short stories that are, between 5 and 10 pages apiece in the version that I had, something like that. A few thousand words.
Very good to read to your children if they're too young to really read it themselves.
Also true. Very whimsical, very fantastic, very creative, very contrarian, very chaotic. They have a lot going for them, and the other thing is that they manage to be contrarian without being snarky, and you can't find that these days.
Yeah,
everybody's got to be snarky,
especially in kids' books.
Yeah, it's really bad.
So one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize about kids' books is you have Pippi Longstocking saying all these things that are they're obviously wrong when she says them, but at the same time, it took some imagination for her to come up with it. And
yes,
when you read something like that to kids, they try to work that out in their heads, which is the exercise you want them to get from their reading. That's what it's there for. You want the kids to be thinking about the story so that they can say, well, why does that work? And why does this work? And why does this thing that doesn't make sense actually make sense?
Yeah.
A lot of children's reading these days a lot of children's books are now written by people who have entirely lost their grasp on this concept. And so
it's not just that they've lost their grasp on the concept, is that they don't have the ability to see things through a child's eyes.
Yeah,
they don't have the ability to see things without cynicism. There's so much cynicism, and there's no cynicism in Pippi Longstocking. Everyone is redeemable, or at least can be made harmless. The main characters are all almost invariably good characters, doing good things and helping people, and being nice to each other. They're sometimes impolite, but they're still nice. You know what I mean? And there's just zero cynicism in the whole thing. It's really great in that sense.
And it's also something interesting to reflect upon is that these days every single movie that comes out from companies like Disney, where they have this highly important lead female character, they act like they've changed the world, like, oh, this is so empowering to women. I would just like to point out that Pippi Longstocking was 1945. Get over yourself.
The tail end of World War II. Yeah. Well, but the whole thing is very, I don't know. The other thing that they do with these female characters is that they make them into insufferable people. And Pippi Longstocking is sometimes annoying a little bit, or she does things that she does things, inadvertently that the adults don't want her to do.
She can be a pest, but she's a pest to the people in the book. She is fun for the reader.
Yeah. But she's also genuinely nice too, and not sarcastic and superior to other people. She doesn't lord over other people that she has a chest, a suitcase full of gold coins. She doesn't lord over other people that she's super strong. She doesn't lord over other people that she lived on the 7 seas. These are all just parts of her life experience, and she, treats them as such, and not as something that she uses to put herself over others.
Yeah, and the fact that she's so self-sufficient without having much of an education is one of the things that she usually talks about to her detriment. She's always like, "Oh, all this knowledge in this school, I went there one day and it's all still rattling around in my head." And there's that scene where she's sitting in the tree outside the school, and she tells the teacher, "I'm kind of hoping that some of it'll reach me through the window and stick instead of trying to take it all in at once."
Yeah.
So she's really not acting superior in any way to anyone throughout these stories. She gives everyone the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't deserve it sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, and you just mentioned self-reliance. The self-reliance is another really good lesson for kids that doesn't get passed around enough.
Yeah, the drabness of modern children's literature, where it's all just, "Ooh, this child is behaving, and the bad child didn't behave, and that's the lesson here," and it's so one-dimensional.
Don't do what Donnie Don't does.
Yeah, and the authors of these stories, it's like you said, they fail to look at it from the perspective of the child. They're just like, "This is the way the world should be, and this is the lesson you need to learn." And
here is the lesson.
Yeah,
and there's not a whole lot of lessons in Pippi Longstocking.
Yeah, you're there to be entertained
lessons.
and use your imagination, and that's the takeaway from it. Like there's no real lesson that Astrid Lindgren is writing when she wrote the scene about Pippi giving the two burglars each a gold coin for playing with her, essentially.
Well, there's a little moral
and
to the
telling
story
them
there,
that they earned
but
it honestly.
it's a fairly benign one, and it's not shoved in your face, but it's like,
and it's not the point of that story either.
No, but like it's well done. The whole book, the whole 3 books that I read were all very well done, and they were little engaging stories, good for little bite size or like bedtime story kind of length stuff. So yeah, I think that this is something that people should definitely get and read to their children, as opposed to finding something modern that fills their children with cynicism and superiority complexes.
And if your children fail to behave, well, read them some Wizard of Oz.
Put them in a tree. Also, check our link for copies of Watership Down. Book and movie.
And live action reproduction from my garden. I wanted to make a joke about PETA or something, but it's right there. It's just right there.
It's pocket bread. It's delicious. You fill it with Euro meat.
Let's just say there's a reason everyone in this live action reproduction is wearing a mask.
Well, because those fully vegetarian diets can cause gas.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
All right, and with that, Pippi Longstocking.
I guess we've got an episode. The Joy of Pippi Longstocking. It is a joyful series of books, and we both highly recommend them.
Yeah,
to children and adults alike.
Best role model of all time.
I don't know about that, but she's definitely a positive one.
Yeah, you're wrong, but yeah, it's not necessarily the best.
Well, I mean, the problem with Pippi Longstocking as a role model is that she can do a lot of things that real people can't do. So, you can get I say that might be the one downside is, like, what's it called where you feel like you can do things that you can't do, like not quite delusions of grandeur, but like,
hey, just hit the bench. Hit the bench.
Yeah, hit the bench. Get some deadlifts. do a bunch of deadlifts. Get strong as Pippi Longstocking. You'll be able to lift a door that has a horse and like 7 people on top of it. Then we'll talk.
Yeah, we're not going to call them reps anymore. We're going to call them pippies.
Ooh, I like that.
How many pips you got today?
No, it has to be the full word.
How many pippies you pulling?
Yeah, there you go. Oh, I did 150 pounds, 7 pippies. It was all right. The green screen in the movie was fun. The green screen effects.
Oh yeah, I was actually pretty confused by the hot air balloon one. There was a scene where I swear I could not figure out if they were using a green screen or if it was just like the way it was filmed made it look like there was an outline. It was the scene where they were landing the balloon in the grass, and I was like, why are they green screening this? And I kept looking at it like, maybe they're not. I can't really tell. Maybe this is just a Technicolor effect.
It could be. Yeah, I don't know. All right. That has been episode 9 of the Wordy Pair. The Joy of Pippi Longstocking, which I've already said several times.
The Joy of Pippi Longstocking.
Any final thoughts?
It's joyous.
It is joyous.
Go enjoy it.
Extremely joyous. Go enjoy it. All right. See y'all later.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.